Marcus had learned to measure time by the hum of recycled air. 6 months aboard the orbital station above Earth, and the sound had become less a noise than a pressure against his eardrums, constant and colorless. He sat in the observation room most evenings, though evening meant nothing in orbit. Just a designated shift when the lights dimmed and the station pretended at circadian rhythm. The window showed Earth below, cloud patterns shifting across blue and brown. He used to track the continents, find patterns in the weather systems. Now he just watched the movement, let his eyes unfocus until it became abstraction. His tablet lay face down on the table beside an empty coffee bulb. 3 messages from the convergence liaison, each more formal than the last. He'd read them again. Let them sit unanswered because answering meant deciding, and deciding meant movement. And movement required something he couldn't locate inside himself anymore. The door hissed. Marcus didn't turn. "You missed the briefing." Dr. Chen's voice, clipped and precise as always. She moved into his peripheral vision, her reflection ghosting across the window's surface. "Third one this month. I read the reports." "That's not the same." He shifted his weight, felt the slight give of the chair beneath him. "They want me back in the lattice." Chen was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had gentled fractionally. "The Koresh situation is deteriorating faster than projected. Then they should find someone else." "There is no one else. You know that." He did know. Had known for 5 years, since the first time they'd connected his aberrant neural architecture to the lattice and discovered he could survive what had destroyed everyone else who'd tried. The knowledge sat in him like a stone, smooth and cold from constant handling. Chen came closer, her hand hovering near his shoulder but not quite touching. "Marcus, Earth needs the resources they're offering." "The colonies." "I know what the colonies need." His voice came out flatter than he'd intended. "I've read those reports too." She withdrew her hand. "When did you last sleep?" "I don't remember." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Chen studied him for another moment, then moved toward the door. She paused at the threshold. "They're sending a transport tomorrow, 0600 hours. Be on it or don't, but make a choice either way." The door sealed behind her, and Marcus returned his attention to the window. His reflection looked back at him, thin and colorless against the curve of the planet. He'd lost weight since the last lattice dive. Hadn't noticed until someone mentioned it, then couldn't stop noticing the way his uniform hung loose at the shoulders, the sharp angle of his collarbone beneath his shirt. He picked up the tablet, scrolled through Chen's messages without reading them, opened his personal files instead, navigated to a folder he hadn't touched in months. Inside, 3 photographs, 2 video clips, a handful of text documents, the detritus of a life before the lattice had rewired him into something useful and broken. The first photograph showed a woman with dark hair pulled back from her face, laughing at something outside the frame. Marcus stared at her expression, tried to remember what had made her laugh. The memory wouldn't form. He could recall the fact of the moment, her 28th birthday, a restaurant in Seattle, rain against the windows, but the feeling of it had dissolved, left only architecture behind. He closed the file, let the tablet go dark. The hum of recycled air continued, steady and endless. The transport bay smelled of hydraulic fluid and ozone. Marcus stood in the boarding queue with his single travel case, watching crew members move through their pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. The ship was convergence design, all smooth surfaces and ambient lighting that shifted through subtle gradients of blue and green. He'd arrived at 545, 15 minutes early, habit from a previous version of himself, the one who'd maintained schedules and routines and the appearance of function. Now he just stood, case handle slick under his palm, while other passengers filed past. Marcus Chen, a young woman in convergence administrative uniform, approached, tablet in hand. Not Chen, the surname was coincidence. This woman was barely 20, her hair cut short and efficient. "I'm Liaison Officer Park. I'll be coordinating your insertion protocols." "I know the protocols. There have been updates since your last dive." She gestured toward the boarding ramp. "If you'll follow me, we can review during transit." The ship's interior was quiet, designed to dampen sound. Marcus followed Park through narrow corridors to a private cabin near the center of the vessel, where the gravitational fluctuations would be minimal. The space was small but precisely appointed, Sleeping pod, workspace, hygiene station, everything necessary, nothing extra. Park set her tablet on the desk. The Koresh delegation will meet you upon arrival. Standard synchronization protocols will begin immediately. The window for intervention is narrower than previous projections suggested. Marcus lowered his case to the floor. How narrow? 16 days. Possibly less if the degradation accelerates. He felt something shift in his chest, a tightness that might have been anxiety, or might have been the residual effects of his last lattice connection. Hard to distinguish anymore. That's not enough time for proper calibration. The Koresh are aware they've agreed to expedited procedures, meaning higher risk of rejection. Park's expression didn't change. All parties have accepted the necessity. Marcus moved to the viewport, a small oval set into the cabin wall. Through it, Earth was already shrinking, the station a bright point against the darkness. He'd been born on that planet, spent 34 years walking its surface before the lattice had changed him. Now it looked like every other terrestrial body, blue and fragile and increasingly distant. "I'll need the full technical specifications," he said without turning. "All degradation data, neural mapping from affected Koresh, comparison analyses with baseline lattice function. Already uploaded to your secure drive." Park moved toward the door. "Transit time is 72 hours. I suggest you use it for rest. The synchronization process is intensive." After she left, Marcus stood at the viewport until Earth became indistinguishable from the surrounding stars. Then he sat at the desk and opened the technical files. Let the familiar architecture of data and analysis fill the space behind his eyes. This he understood, the clean logic of systems, the predictability of numbers, the way problems could be broken into manageable components. He worked through the night cycle, tracking degradation patterns across the lattice's multidimensional structure. The corruption was elegant in its complexity, almost beautiful in the mathematical sense. Evolutionary pressure expressed as neural noise, adaptation manifesting as system failure. At some point he must have slept, because he woke slumped over the desk, neck stiff and mouth dry. The data was still scrolling across his screen, patterns repeating in fractal iterations. He rubbed his eyes, felt the grit of exhaustion there. His reflection in the darkened viewport looked haggard. He studied it dispassionately, the lines around his mouth, the hollow beneath his cheekbones, the flatness in his eyes. A machine wearing a human face, efficient, functional, empty. The convergence station existed in a space between dimensions, anchored to real space by gravity tethers that shimmered like heat distortion. Marcus felt the transition as the transport slipped through the threshold, a moment of compression followed by expansion, his perception briefly untethered from linear time. When it passed, the station filled the viewport, vast and organic in its architecture. It resembled a nautilus shell expanded to planetary scale, chambers spiraling inward toward a central core where the lattice's physical infrastructure pulsed with captured starlight. The docking sequence was smooth, automated. Marcus gathered his case and made his way to the debarkation port, where Park waited with three figures he recognized from briefing files, Koresh representatives, their forms partially obscured by ceremonial robes that shifted color in response to their emotional states. The tallest stepped forward. "Marcus Chen, we are grateful for your return." The translation came through his implant, the Koresh delegate's actual voice, a series of harmonic resonances that made his teeth ache. "I haven't agreed to anything yet," Marcus said. The Koresh's robe darkened slightly. "The protocols require synchronization regardless of final commitment. Your biology must be prepared." Park touched his elbow lightly. "It's standard procedure. You remember from last time." He did remember. Remembered the invasion of it, the systematic mapping of every biological function until his body felt like borrowed property. Remembered Silhera's hands on his skin, clinical and impossibly intimate. "Where is the preparation chamber?" They led him deeper into the station, through corridors that curved in ways human architecture didn't attempt. Other species moved past, beings of light and shadow, creatures whose forms defied easy categorization. None of them looked at Marcus directly. To them, he was a tool, useful, necessary, but ultimately replaceable. The chamber was exactly as he remembered, circular, the walls embedded with bio-monitoring equipment, a platform at the center that hummed with subsonic frequency, and beside it, waiting, Silhara. She was taller than human average, her skin the deep violet black of deep space, her eyes catching light in fractured patterns. When she saw him, her robe shifted through shades of recognition, burgundy to copper to gold. Marcus. Not a question, not a greeting, just his name, spoken with a weight he couldn't interpret. Silhara. The other attendants filed in behind them, taking positions around the platform. Park remained near the entrance, tablet active, recording. Marcus set down his case and moved to the platform's edge. Silhara approached, stopping just outside comfortable speaking distance. The degradation has worsened since our last communication. We've lost 17% additional neural coherence in the past standard week. I've reviewed the data. Data doesn't convey the experience. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then touched his chest directly over his heart. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, her skin was warm, the contact sending a familiar electric sensation across his ribs. We're dying, Marcus. Not theoretically. Actually. He looked down at her hand, at the contrast of violet against the grey of his uniform. His heart beat steadily beneath her palm. He could feel her monitoring it, cataloguing his cardiovascular response. I understand. Do you? Her fingers pressed slightly harder. You survived the lattice. It changed you, but you survived. We don't have that resilience. If the lattice fails, we fail with it. Every Karish consciousness is bound to the network. We have no concept of individual survival. Marcus met her eyes. In them he saw something familiar, the hollow recognition of approaching extinction, the weight of being unable to save oneself. I'll do what I can. Her hand withdrew, and he felt the absence of it like a drop in temperature. Then we begin. The ritual began at sunset, though sunset on the convergence station was purely symbolic, a dimming of ambient light calibrated to Koresh circadian rhythms. Marcus lay on the platform while Silhara and her attendants arranged themselves around him in precise geometric patterns. Remove your shirt, Silhara said. The synchronization requires direct skin contact. He complied, folding the fabric and setting it aside. The air in the chamber was cool against his chest and arms, raising goosebumps along his shoulders. The attendants began to chant in subsonic frequencies that Marcus felt more than heard, vibrations that resonated in his sternum and jawbone. Silhara's hands descended to his temples, fingers splayed to cover the most neural density. The contact was immediately overwhelming, heat and pressure and something else, a kind of reaching that happened beneath his skin. His breath caught. Relax, she murmured. Fighting the process only intensifies discomfort. But relaxing meant surrender, and Marcus had built his entire identity around control. He forced his muscles to unclench incrementally, felt the platform's hum increase in response to his lowered resistance. The other attendants moved closer, their hands hovering just above his skin, mapping the electromagnetic patterns of his nervous system. When they touched him, fingertips to his wrists, his throat, the inside of his elbows, the sensations layered until he couldn't distinguish one from another. He became acutely aware of his body as a landscape being explored, catalogued, adjusted. The intimacy of it was startling, invasive in ways that had nothing to do with sexuality and everything to do with vulnerability. Silhara's face filled his vision, her expression concentrated. Your neural patterns are more chaotic than before. Have you been maintaining the stabilization exercises? He hadn't thought about them in months. No. Her frown manifested as a darkening of her robe from gold to bronze. This will take longer then. The synchronization requires coherence. The process stretched across hours. Marcus lost track of time, his awareness narrowing to physical sensation, the pressure of hands, the hum of the platform, the subsonic chanting that seemed to originate from inside his own chest. At some point his body began to respond involuntarily, muscles twitching, breath quickening, heart rate climbing despite his attempts to remain calm. Silhara's hand moved to his sternum, pressing down with firm pressure. Breathe. Match my rhythm. He focused on her breathing, watched the rise and fall of her chest, let his own respiration slow to mirror hers. The synchronization began to take hold. He could feel it as a subtle alignment, like radio static gradually resolving into signal. His consciousness began to expand at the edges, brushing against something vast and multifaceted. Then the pain started. It wasn't physical exactly, more like the neural equivalent of tearing, his individual thought patterns being pulled into shapes they weren't designed to hold. Marcus gasped, tried to pull back, but Silhara's hand held him pinned. "Stay with me," she said, her voice tight. "This is the threshold. Cross it or the entire process fails." He could feel her presence in the proto-connection, her terror barely contained beneath layers of professional composure. The Koresh experienced fear, as frost spreading through their limbs. He felt it now, second-hand and immediate, her body's response bleeding into his awareness. Marcus pushed through the pain, let his consciousness fragment and stretch, and finally settle into the new configuration. The chamber came back into focus, but subtly altered. He could see the electromagnetic fields now, the way energy flowed between the attendants and the platform and himself. Silhara's dual hearts beat visibly beneath her skin, rapid and irregular. "You're through," she breathed, and her relief was palpable, a warmth that spread between them through the contact of skin on skin. The attendants withdrew, leaving only Silhara with her hand still pressed to his chest. Marcus could feel his own heartbeat against her palm faster than normal, adrenaline spiked. Could feel her awareness of it, her cataloguing of his physical responses. The moment extended, held by shared exhaustion and the residual intimacy of forced synchronization. Then she pulled back, and the connection dimmed to something manageable. "Rest now. Tomorrow we enter the lattice." Marcus sat up slowly, his body heavy and uncoordinated. His shirt lay where he'd left it, and he pulled it on with clumsy movements. Silhara watched him, her expression unreadable. "Do you still have nightmares?" she asked quietly. "From the last dive?" He met her eyes. "I don't dream anymore." Something shifted in her face, a sadness that manifested as deep purple threading through her robe. "Neither do we. The lattice used to show us each other's dreams. Now there's only silence." She turned and left the chamber, her attendants following. Marcus remained on the platform, staring at his hands. They were shaking. He wasn't sure when that had started. The entry point was a hemisphere of pure light, suspended in the station's core chamber. Marcus stood at its edge, suited in bio-monitoring equipment that tracked every neural fluctuation. Silhara waited beside him, similarly equipped, her presence now familiar in the synchronized corners of his awareness. "The corruption is concentrated in the tertiary connection layers," she said, pulling up holographic displays that showed the lattice's degrading architecture. "We'll need to descend past the primary conscious layer into the substrate where autonomous functions integrate." Marcus studied the patterns, his mind automatically parsing the mathematical structures beneath the visual representation. "The dissonance will be worse at that depth. My neural architecture might not maintain coherence. Without coherence, you'll fragment. The pieces won't reassemble." "I know." Silhara's hand found his, her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture he suspected was more human than Koresh. "I'll anchor you. If you begin to disperse, I'll pull you back." "At what cost to yourself?" She didn't answer, just tightened her grip and stepped forward into the light. Marcus followed. The transition was instantaneous and eternal. His consciousness expanded past the boundaries of his skull, his sense of self diluting across dimensions he had no framework to comprehend. He felt the presence of billions, the cold precision of the Senthari, the fractal emotions of the Ulneth, the song structure of the Vayasi, and beneath it all, threaded through every connection, the wrongness. Silhara's presence was a lifeline, distinct and solid in the chaos. Marcus oriented toward her, used her clarity to maintain his own boundaries. Together they descended past the primary layer, where conscious thoughts flowed like currents, past the secondary layer, where memories and identity cohered, into the deep substrate where biological imperatives and species-specific instincts operated beneath awareness. Here the corruption was obvious, overlapping signals, recursive loops, patterns that should not exist. But more than that, Marcus could see what the corruption actually was. Evolution, adaptation, the lattice incorporating complexity from new species, developing emergent properties that the original architecture couldn't contain. The Koresh were dying because they couldn't change. The lattice was changing whether they could or not. Marcus tried to surface, to pull back and carry this understanding with him, but something held him. A loop in the pattern, a recursion that caught his consciousness and began to cycle it through the same sequence repeatedly. He felt himself fragmenting, individual thoughts separating and spinning off into the void. Then Silhara was there, her presence flooding through the connection with overwhelming force. She wrapped herself around the fragmenting pieces of his consciousness, held them together through sheer will. But the effort cost her. Marcus could feel her own coherence beginning to slip, the frost fear spreading through her system as she sacrificed her stability for his. He gathered himself, used the anchor of her presence to reassemble, but he didn't pull away immediately, stayed in that space where their consciousnesses overlapped, feeling the totality of her terror. The Karesh didn't fear death the way humans did. They feared silence, the absence of connection, existing alone inside their own minds, with no one to share the burden of consciousness. Marcus understood, finally, what he was being asked to save. Not lives, exactly, but the ability to be together, to never be alone. He pulled them both back to the surface in a rush that left him gasping on the chamber floor. Silhara collapsed across his chest. Her weight was solid, real, her breath rapid against his neck. He could feel her dual hearts hammering against his ribs, feel the tremors running through her body. "I've got you," he said, his arms coming up automatically to steady her. "You're through." She didn't move for a long moment, just breathed against his skin while her heartbeats gradually slowed. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were wet, though he didn't know if Karesh could cry or if that was just refraction from the chamber's light. "You found it," she whispered. "Yes. And?" Marcus looked up at the ceiling, at the geometric patterns embedded there. "I found it, and I don't know if I can fix it." The council chamber was designed for consensus, circular and open, with no head position or hierarchical arrangement. Representatives from 17 species, gathered in holographic projection or physical presence, their attention focused on Marcus as he stood at the chamber's center. He'd spent 6 hours preparing the report, distilling nonlinear perception into sequential explanation. The words felt inadequate, stripped of the crucial context that could only be experienced directly in the lattice. "The corruption is not an external intrusion," he began. "It's evolutionary pressure. The lattice is adapting to accommodate species that joined after its original construction. The rigid substrate that serves the founding civilizations cannot contain the complexity of newer neural architectures." A Centauri representative manifested in cool blue light. "Adaptation suggests improvement. The system is failing." "For the Karesh, yes. Their biology requires absolute neural synchronization. They have no tolerance for variability. But other species," Marcus gestured to the assembled representatives, "are benefiting from the increased complexity. The Ulneth emotional range has expanded by 40%. The Vayasi song structure has developed new harmonic layers. The lattice is evolving toward greater sophistication at the cost of compatibility with rigid neural structures." Silhara stood among the Karesh delegation, her robe a deep burgundy that Marcus had learned to read as distress. "You're saying the lattice is choosing to abandon us?" "I'm saying the lattice doesn't choose. It adapts. The question is whether we freeze it in its current state to preserve Karesh compatibility or allow evolution to continue." The chamber erupted in discussion, voices overlapping in multiple frequencies. Marcus stood silent, watching the debate flow around him. The engineers understood the technical reality. The politicians resisted it. To repair the lattice as the Karesh needed would require halting all evolutionary processes, preventing new species from joining, freezing the network at its current level of sophistication. Other species would suffer, growth would stop. The price of saving the Karesh was stagnation for everyone else. A Vayasi delegate, their form composed of interwoven light filaments, addressed Marcus directly. "You present this as binary choice, freeze or evolve. Is there no middle solution?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "The data suggests gradual adaptation might be possible, but it would take decades to implement. The Karesh have weeks." The discussion continued for hours. Marcus answered questions mechanically, his mind elsewhere. He kept thinking about Silhara's presence in the lattice, the way she'd sacrificed her own coherence to hold his fragments together. Kept thinking about Koresh, fear manifesting as frost, the terror of silence, of being alone. Finally, a Senthari elder called for adjournment. This decision requires meditation. We reconvene in 2 days with preliminary recommendations. The chamber emptied slowly. Marcus remained at the center, exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. When he finally turned to leave, Silhara was waiting near the exit. "Walk with me," she said. They moved through the station's curved corridors in silence, passing through districts designed for different species' environmental needs. Marcus noticed details he'd missed before, the way Silhara's robes shifted in response to proximity to other Koresh, the subtle changes in her breathing pattern when they entered areas with different atmospheric composition. She led him to an observation deck he hadn't visited, smaller and more intimate than the public viewing areas. Through the viewport, the station's central core pulsed with captured starlight, the lattice's physical infrastructure visible as cascading patterns of energy. "When I was young," Silhara said quietly, "before I understood what the lattice truly was, I used to think we could hear the thoughts of stars. The network felt infinite, timeless. I couldn't imagine existence outside it." Marcus stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "And now? Now I understand that infinity has edges, that timelessness can end." She turned to face him, and in the dim light her eyes were darker, more human. "You're going to recommend they let us die. I haven't decided what to recommend. But you will, because that's the logical conclusion. Why should 17 species stagnate to preserve one?" He wanted to deny it, but the calculation was obvious. Utilitarian ethics pointed in only one direction. "I don't want to." "Want is irrelevant. You'll do what serves the greater good." Her hand lifted to his chest again, that gesture he was beginning to recognize as instinctive. "You always do. It's why you survived the lattice when others didn't. You can set aside what you feel in service of what needs to happen." Marcus became acutely aware of her touch, the warmth of her palm through his shirt, the steady pressure that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. "Oh, you don't know what I feel." "Don't I?" Her other hand rose to his face, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. "You're synchronized with me now. I can sense the edges of your consciousness, even outside the lattice. I feel your guilt, your exhaustion, the way you've hollowed yourself out until there's nothing left but function." He should step back, re-establish professional distance. Instead, he stood frozen, letting her map his face with her fingers, letting himself be seen in ways he'd avoided for years. "I was like you once," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "After my first lattice integration, I thought I had to become pure logic. Emotion felt like weakness. But the Koresh don't work that way. We need connection the way you need oxygen. Without it, we're not just lonely. We're incomplete." Her hand settled at the nape of his neck, fingers threading into his hair. The gesture was intimate, almost unbearably so, and Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a pressure he'd been containing for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "I can't save you," he said. "I know. I'm sorry." "I know that too." She pulled him closer, and Marcus let himself lean into the contact, his forehead coming to rest against hers. They stood like that for a long time, breathing the same air while the lattice pulsed beyond the viewport, and the weight of impossible decisions settled around them like gravity. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay in his assigned quarters staring at the ceiling, feeling the echo of Silhara's presence at the edges of his consciousness. The synchronization had created a residual link between them, nothing as complete as the lattice connection, but enough that he could sense her emotional state if he concentrated. She was afraid, the frost fear spreading through her system in slow waves, advancing and receding with her attempts at control. He got up at 0400, pulled on his clothes and moved through the empty corridors toward the technical archives. If there was a solution, it would be in the data. Some pattern he'd missed, some configuration that allowed for both preservation and evolution. The archives were vast, containing 300 years of lattice development history. Marcus requested access to the original design specifications, the founding protocols that had established how species integrated with the network. He pulled up holographic displays and began cross-referencing degradation patterns with structural modifications, looking for the decision point where the lattice's evolution had diverged from its original parameters. He worked through the morning shift change, through the midday cycle, barely registering the passage of time. At some point, Park appeared with food, which he ate mechanically without tasting. The data began to blur, patterns bleeding into patterns, until he couldn't distinguish signal from noise. "You're going to make yourself sick." Marcus looked up. Silhara stood in the archive entrance, her robe a muted grey that suggested resignation. "I'm close to something," he said. "There's a correlation between species integration order and degradation severity. If I can map the causal chain—" "Marcus, stop." He turned back to the displays. "Give me 6 more hours. I can isolate the variable." Silhara moved behind him, her hands settling on his shoulders. "You've been at this for 14 hours. Your neural coherence is destabilizing. I can feel it through the link." "Then break the link." "I can't. It won't fully dissolve for another week." Her fingers pressed into the tight muscles of his neck, finding knots he hadn't realized were there. "And even if I could, I wouldn't. You need an anchor right now." The pressure of her hands was grounding, pulling his attention away from the data and into his body. He became aware of the headache building behind his eyes, the tension in his spine, the way his hands had started to shake from sustained adrenaline. "I can't accept it," he said quietly. "That there's no solution. That I have to choose between your extinction and everyone else's stagnation. Sometimes there is no good choice. Only different kinds of loss." Marcus closed his eyes, let his head drop forward. Silhara's hands moved to his temples, her touch gentle. He could feel her awareness overlapping his, monitoring his neural state with the same precision she'd used during synchronization. "Come with me," she said after a moment. "Where?" "Somewhere you can rest. Actually rest, not just stare at data until your mind fractures." He let her guide him from the archives, through corridors that curved in geometries he still couldn't quite track. She brought him to what he assumed were her personal quarters, smaller than he'd expected, furnished simply with sleeping platform, workspace, and a viewport that showed the station's outer districts. "Lie down," she instructed. Marcus complied, too exhausted to argue. The platform was warm, calibrated to Karesh body temperature. Silhara settled beside him, not quite touching but close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "When was the last time you let yourself be close to someone?" she asked. He thought back. Months. Years. The woman in the photograph, whose laugh he could no longer remember. "I don't know. You humans, so afraid of need." Her hand found his, fingers interlacing. "The Karesh understand that independence is an illusion. We're born connected. We live connected. The idea of existing alone is inconceivable. And now you have to learn." "Yes." Her grip tightened. "If we survive the disconnection, we'll be something new. Something that can exist in silence. I don't know if that's evolution or extinction wearing a different face." Marcus turned toward her, found her watching him with those fractured light eyes. The space between them was small, intimate. He was aware of her breathing, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her skin against his. "I'm sorry," he said again, because there were no other words. Silhara's free hand rose to his face, thumb tracing his cheekbone. "Stop apologizing. You didn't create this situation. But I'm the one who has to decide how it ends." "No. You're the one who has to tell us what's actually happening. The council will decide. That's not your burden to carry." But it felt like his burden, had felt like his burden since the moment they'd synchronized him and made him essential. He closed his eyes, felt Silhara's presence steady and solid through the link they shared. "Stay," she said quietly. "Just for a few hours. Let yourself rest." He did. Fell into something not quite sleep, but deeper than wakefulness, his consciousness drifting in the space between, while Silhara's presence kept him anchored. When he woke, the lighting had shifted to evening cycle and she was still there, her hand still holding his, her breathing slow and even. Marcus watched her for a moment, this being who was simultaneously alien and intimately familiar. Then he carefully extracted his hand and rose, moving to the viewport. The lattice pulsed beyond, beautiful and broken, its degradation visible as dark threads spreading through the light. He finally understood what he had to do. The council reconvened at the appointed time, representatives gathering with grim formality. Marcus stood at the chamber's center again, but this time he'd brought something beyond data, a proposal he'd assembled in the hours after leaving Silhara's quarters. I've identified a third option, he began without preamble. The lattice can't accommodate both rigid and adaptive neural structures simultaneously, but it can support sequential adaptations if we're willing to accept temporary disconnection. The Centauri elder manifested. Explain. Marcus pulled up the technical specifications he'd compiled. We create an isolated loop in the lattice, a separate network running parallel to the main system. The Koresh disconnect from the primary lattice and transfer to this isolated section. This gives them neural stability while we implement gradual adaptations to their biology over multiple generations. Generations? Silhara's voice cut through the murmur of discussion. You're talking about evolutionary timescales. Accelerated evolution, genetic modification combined with neural plasticity training. It's possible to introduce adaptive capacity to rigid biological systems, but it can't happen overnight. A Koresh elder stepped forward. You're proposing we fundamentally alter what we are. I'm proposing you adapt or cease to exist. Those are the only options. The chamber fell silent. Marcus met Silhara's eyes across the space between them, saw the conflict there, hope and horror intertwined. The Vayasi delegate spoke, their light filaments pulsing. This isolated loop, it would require significant resources. Who bears that cost? Everyone, Marcus said. The Koresh sacrifice their connection to the broader galactic consciousness. Other species sacrifice resources and processing power to maintain the parallel system. And humanity, he paused, feeling the weight of the commitment, provides the genetic templates and medical expertise for adaptive modifications. Why would humans agree to that? The Centauri asked. Because Earth needs what you're offering, resources, technology, security, and because I'm recommending it. He glanced at Park, who stood recording near the chamber's edge. That carries weight here, doesn't it? My recommendations? The politics shifted visibly, calculations recalibrating, alliances reforming around this new possibility. Marcus watched it happen with detached interest, understanding for the first time the true nature of his position. He wasn't essential because of his neural architecture. He was essential because his isolation gave him a perspective no one else in the lattice could achieve. He was the outside observer, the unconnected variable, the one who could see the system clearly because he wasn't part of it. The discussion stretched across hours, technical objections raised and addressed, political concerns negotiated. Marcus answered questions mechanically, his mind tracking multiple threads of argument simultaneously. Silhara remained silent throughout, her robe shifting through shades he couldn't interpret. Finally, the Centauri elder called for preliminary consensus. We will take this proposal to our respective governments. Reconvene in 1 week with authority to commit. The chamber emptied. Marcus stood at the center, feeling the weight of what he'd set in motion. If the proposal succeeded, he'd just committed humanity to decades of medical collaboration and resource sharing. If it failed, he'd given the Koresh false hope before their extinction. Silhara approached last, stopping just outside arm's reach. You didn't discuss this with me. I know. You made promises on humanity's behalf without consultation. Yes. Her robe flickered through several colors rapidly. Anger, confusion, something that might have been gratitude. Why? Marcus met her eyes. Because I couldn't let you die, and I couldn't accept galactic stagnation. So I found a different answer. This isn't heroism, it's desperation. I know that too. Silhara moved closer, her hand rising to his chest in that gesture that had become familiar. The isolated loop. It means we'll be alone, truly alone, for the first time in our species' history. We won't have the lattice to dilute our consciousness. We'll just be ourselves, individual. Isn't that what you wanted? To learn independence. I don't know what I want anymore. Her voice cracked slightly. When I touch you like this, I'm aware of the boundary between us. Where I end and you begin. That awareness is terrifying. The lattice lets us blur those edges, become part of something larger. Without it, she didn't finish. Marcus covered her hand with his, held it against his sternum. Without it, you learn to exist in the space between. Not merged, not isolated. Just together. Separate but connected. Like humans. Like humans. Silhara's other hand rose to his face, and Marcus let himself lean into the touch, let himself acknowledge the connection forming between them that had nothing to do with the lattice and everything to do with shared fear and fragile hope. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I know, so am I." They stood like that while the chamber's lights dimmed around them, two beings learning what it meant to be alone together. The week passed in suspended animation. Marcus returned to his quarters and tried to work, but the data felt meaningless now. He'd made his recommendation, given his testimony. The decision was out of his hands, carried away to distant governments and political councils he would never see. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt untethered, consciousness drifting without purpose. Silhara came to him on the third day, appearing at his door without announcement. "I can't feel you through the link anymore." Marcus looked up from his blank workspace. "The synchronization is dissolving." "I know. It feels like losing a limb." She moved into the room, studying the sparse furnishings, the single personal item he'd brought, a photograph in a digital frame cycling through images he never looked at. "Tell me about them." "Who?" "The people in your pictures." He glanced at the frame. Currently it showed the woman with dark hair, still laughing at something outside the frame. "That's Maya. Was Maya. We were together for 3 years." "What happened?" "The lattice happened. The first dive changed me. I came back different. She said it was like I'd been hollowed out. Left the shell but took the person." Marcus turned back to his empty workspace. She wasn't wrong. Silhara picked up the frame, examined the photograph closely. "She's beautiful." "Yes." "Do you miss her?" "I don't know. I remember missing her, remember the feeling of loss, but the feeling itself is gone, like remembering pain without actually hurting." She set the frame down carefully. "The lattice did that to you, took your capacity for connection and rewired it towards system integration." "Probably. And you're recommending the same thing for us. Fundamental alteration of what we are." Marcus finally met her eyes. "Is that why you're here? To tell me you're opposed to the proposal?" "No." She moved closer, settling onto the bench beside him. "I'm here because I'm afraid of what comes after. If the proposal passes, I'll be disconnected from the lattice within a month. I've never existed outside the network. I don't know who I am without it. Then you'll find out. Same as I had to. And look how well that worked." Her hand gestured to the sterile quarters, the blank workspace, the emotional absence that filled the space around him. "You're a warning, Marcus. A vision of what happens when you lose your capacity for connection." He didn't deny it, couldn't. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm a vision of what happens when you survive something that should have destroyed you. I'm still here, still functional. That has to count for something." Silhara was quiet for a long moment. Then she took his hand, interlaced their fingers with deliberate care. "I don't want to just survive. I want to live. I don't know the difference anymore." "I know. That's what terrifies me." They sat in silence while the station hummed around them. Marcus felt the residual synchronization link between them, fading but still present, a ghost of the intimacy they'd shared in the lattice. On impulse, he tightened his grip on her hand, felt her answering pressure. "Stay tonight," he said quietly. "If you want. I don't sleep much, but the company might be tolerable." Silhara's robe shifted to a color he'd never seen before, pale lavender threaded with gold. "You're asking me to be with you just to be, no purpose, no function." "Yes. I don't think you've done that in years." "No." She leaned against him, her weight settling along his side. "Then we'll learn together." They did. Sat in comfortable silence while the lighting cycled through evening to night, while the station's ambient sounds shifted from day traffic to the quiet hum of minimal systems. At some point, Silhara's breathing deepened, her body relaxing into sleep against his shoulder. Marcus remained awake, acutely aware of her warmth, the steady rhythm of her dual heartbeats, the way her presence made the empty quarters feel less hollow. He thought about Maya, about the shell she'd said he'd become. Wondered if Silhara was right, if he was just a warning. But sitting there with her sleeping weight against him, feeling the ghost of their fading connection, something shifted. Not healing exactly, but the first recognition that healing might be possible. When dawn cycle arrived, Silhara woke slowly, blinking up at him with disoriented confusion. "I fell asleep." "Yes." "On you." "Yes." Her robe flushed deep burgundy. "That was Inappropriate. Was it? She sat up, creating distance between them, but her hand remained in his, fingers still interlaced. The council announces their decision today. Marcus had forgotten. The entire week compressed into the intimacy of last night, the simple act of sitting together. Right. Are you ready? He thought about it. About what acceptance would mean. Decades of collaboration, his expertise committed to Koresh genetic modification, his life bound to this station and these people. About what rejection would mean, returning to Earth, to the empty observation deck and recycled air and the slow dissolution of whatever capacity for connection still remained. No, he said honestly, but I don't think readiness is required. Silhara stood, pulling him to his feet. Then we face it together. The council chamber was full for the first time since Marcus had arrived. Not just representatives, but observers from every species, their presence physical or holographic, the air thick with mingled atmospheres and electromagnetic resonances. Marcus stood at the center, Silhara beside him. He could feel her terror through the fading link, the frost fear spreading through her system, barely contained. His own fear was quieter, colder, a weight in his chest that made breathing difficult. The Senthari elder manifested first, their blue light somehow more solid than usual. We have reached consensus. All 17 member species have agreed to the proposed framework with modifications. Marcus felt Silhara's hand find his, her grip tight enough to hurt. The isolated lattice loop will be constructed over a 6-month period. The Koresh will begin disconnection protocols immediately, with full transfer to the parallel system upon completion. Genetic modification programs will commence in partnership with human medical expertise, with projected adaptive integration over 3 generations. Relief flooded through Marcus, sudden and overwhelming. He'd expected resistance, political maneuvering, demands for concessions, not acceptance, not consensus. However, the Senthari continued, there are conditions. The human representative responsible for the proposal must remain on station as liaison and oversight authority. No human government may claim sovereignty over the genetic modification protocols, and the Koresh must accept that adaptive integration may fundamentally alter their species' identity. Silhara's grip tightened further. Marcus glanced at her, saw the conflict written across her face, hope and horror still intertwined. Do the Koresh accept these terms? The Senthari asked. The Koresh delegation conferred in rapid harmonic exchanges. Finally, their eldest stepped forward. We accept, with gratitude and grief. And does the human representative accept permanent station assignment? Marcus felt the weight of it settle across his shoulders. Permanent. No return to Earth, no going back to the empty quarters and recycled air. His life bound here, to this work, to these people. He looked at Silhara, saw her watching him with those fractured light eyes, saw the fragile hope there, thought about last night, the simple act of sitting together, the way her presence had made the emptiness feel less absolute. I accept. The chamber erupted in formal acknowledgements, species-specific gestures of agreement. Marcus heard it distantly, his attention focused on Silhara's face as her robe shifted through colors too rapidly to interpret, relief and fear and something that might have been joy. Then the formal proceedings dissolved into logistics, technical discussions about construction timelines and resource allocation. Park materialized at Marcus's elbow with contractual documents requiring his biometric signature. He signed mechanically, committing his next several decades to galactic bureaucracy. When he finally looked up, most of the chamber had emptied. Silhara waited near the exit. Her robe settled into that pale lavender gold he was beginning to recognize as her personal color for hope. You stayed, she said as he approached. I stayed. Why? Marcus thought about his answer, about Maya and the shell he'd become, about the observation deck on the orbital station and the years of measured time by the hum of recycled air, about last night, sitting in comfortable silence with Silhara's sleeping weight against his shoulder. Because going back means returning to what I was. Staying means I might become something else. Silhara's hand rose to his chest, that gesture now familiar and grounding. Something better or something worse? I don't know yet. She moved closer, and Marcus let her, let himself be pulled into the intimacy of proximity. Her other hand settled at his neck, fingers threading into his hair, and he realized with sudden clarity that this was what connection felt like. Not the overwhelming merger of the lattice, but the deliberate choice to be close to someone, to let them see you and be seen in return. "I'm still afraid," Silhara whispered. "So am I." "Good. Fear means we're alive." Marcus leaned his forehead against hers, breathing in the metallic floral scent of her skin, feeling the warmth radiating between them. "When does the disconnection begin?" "Tomorrow. They want to move quickly, before the degradation accelerates further." Her voice wavered slightly. "I don't know what I'll be when it's done, if I'll still be myself." "You'll be yourself, just different." "Like you?" "Maybe. Or maybe better. Maybe you'll learn to exist in the space between without losing everything you are." She pulled back slightly, studying his face. "I want to try, but I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Don't let me become empty. If I start to hollow out like you did, don't let me disappear. Keep me anchored." Marcus felt the weight of the promise, the responsibility. But he also felt something else, the first stirring of purpose beyond function, the recognition that someone needed him not for his neural architecture, but for his presence. "I promise." Silhara kissed him then, and Marcus registered surprise before surrendering to the contact. Her lips were warm, the kiss gentle and searching, an exploration rather than a claim. He responded carefully, let himself feel the sensation without analyzing it, let himself be in his body instead of his head. When they separated, Silhara's robe was full gold, luminous. "I've never done that before. Kissed someone." The lattice always made such individual intimacy unnecessary. How was it? Terrifying, wonderful, incomplete without the shared consciousness to deepen it. She smiled, the expression still slightly alien on her features. But maybe that's the point. Learning to accept incompleteness. Marcus took her hand, felt the now familiar interlacing of fingers. "Come on. Let's get you ready for tomorrow." They left the chamber together, walking through curved corridors toward the medical section where the disconnection protocols waited. Marcus felt the fear still present in both of them, but also something new. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of it. The recognition that transformation might lead somewhere beyond emptiness. The medical bay was sterile and cold, designed for universal compatibility rather than comfort. Silhara lay on the platform while technicians attached neural monitors to her temples, her wrists, the base of her spine. Marcus sat beside her, his hand holding hers, while machines hummed to life around them. "The process takes approximately 6 hours, the lead technician explained, their form vaguely humanoid but composed of flowing liquid metal. We'll gradually reduce her connection density to the main lattice while strengthening the link to the isolated loop. Consciousness fragmentation is common, disorientation, temporary identity loss." "Temporary?" Silhara asked, her voice tight. "Usually. Sometimes the disconnection is permanent." Marcus felt her grip tighten. "What percentage?" 12% experience persistent dissociation." Silhara closed her eyes. "Those are not comforting odds." "No," the technician agreed, "but they're better than extinction." The procedure began. Marcus watched the neural displays, saw the intricate web of connections that bound Silhara to billions of other consciousnesses begin to thin, threads dissolving one by one. Her robe flickered erratically, color shifts no longer controlled, but spasming in response to the dissolution. Halfway through, she started to fragment. Her hand went limp in his, her breathing shallow and irregular. The frost fear he'd felt through their link intensified, became overwhelming, then suddenly vanished as the link itself dissolved. Marcus felt the absence like a physical wound. The residual synchronization that had let him sense her emotional state went silent, leaving him blind to her internal experience. He tightened his grip on her hand anyway, held on while her body convulsed and her robe flashed through colors that had no meaning. "Silhara," he said, leaning close. "I'm here. Stay with me." No response. Her eyes moved beneath closed lids, rapid and disoriented. The technicians monitored their instruments with clinical detachment, making adjustments to the disconnection rate, the isolated loop integration. Marcus wanted to demand they stop, give her time to stabilize, but he knew the process couldn't be halted without risking complete neural collapse. So he stayed, held her hand and talked to her in low, steady tones, telling her about Earth, the weight of gravity, the smell of rain, the particular quality of sunlight filtering through clouds, things she'd never experienced but might understand through his descriptions. After 4 hours, her convulsions began to ease. After 5, her breathing steadied. After 6, her eyes opened, unfocused and distant. Silhara. Marcus leaned into her field of vision. "Can you hear me?" Her gaze found his, and he saw recognition there, fragile and uncertain. "Marcus?" Relief flooded through him. "Yes, I'm here. I can't. There's nothing. Where did everyone go?" Her voice rose, panic threading through. "The lattice. I can't feel the lattice. You're in the isolated loop now, it's working. You're connected to the other Koresh going through disconnection. I can't feel them either. I can't feel anything except..." She looked down at their joined hands. "You. I can feel you. Your hand holding mine. The pressure, the warmth. But that's all. Just this one connection. That's how humans experience the world. One connection at a time." Silhara's eyes filled with something that looked like tears. "How do you bear it? The silence?" Marcus had no good answer. Had learned to bear it by hollowing himself out, by reducing needs until loneliness became background noise. But Silhara couldn't do that. Wouldn't do that. He wouldn't let her. "You don't bear it alone," he said finally. "You find people who make the silence bearable, and you hold on to them." He helped her sit up as the technicians removed the monitors. Her movements were uncoordinated, uncertain, like she was learning to inhabit her body for the first time. When she stood, she swayed, and Marcus caught her, his arm around her waist. "I feel so small," she whispered against his shoulder. "So contained. Is this what it's always like for you?" "Yes. I don't know if I can survive this." "You can. You will." He guided her from the medical bay, supporting most of her weight. Other Koresh were emerging from their disconnection procedures, all of them disoriented and frightened, their robes flickering erratically. Marcus brought Silhara to her quarters and helped her onto the sleeping platform. "Don't leave," she said, gripping his hand. "Please. The silence is unbearable." "I won't leave." He settled beside her, and Silhara pressed against him, seeking contact, presence, any reminder that she wasn't completely alone. Marcus wrapped his arms around her and held on while she shook with silent sobs, her robe gone completely grey. This was the cost of his solution. This trauma, this terror, this fundamental violation of what the Koresh were. He'd saved them from extinction, but couldn't save them from the pain of transformation. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "Don't apologize, you gave us a chance." Her arms tightened around him. "Even if it hurts, even if we're never the same, you gave us a future." They stayed like that through the night cycle, Silhara gradually stabilizing in the circle of his arms, her breathing eventually evening out into something like sleep. Marcus remained awake, acutely aware of her weight against him, the trust implicit in her vulnerability. Somewhere in those hours, something shifted in him. The hollowness he'd carried for years began to fill, not with the overwhelming merger of the lattice, but with something quieter and more sustainable. The recognition that he could be needed not for his function, but for his presence. That connection didn't require losing himself. When dawn cycle arrived, Silhara woke slowly, still pressed against his chest. She looked up at him, and her eyes were clearer, more focused. "I survived the night," she said, wonder in her voice. "Yes, the silence is still there, but it's not unbearable anymore, because you're not alone in it." Her robe shifted to pale lavender, that color of fragile hope. "Stay with me. Not just tonight, all of it, while we learn to be what we're becoming." Marcus thought about Maya, about the shell he'd become, about the observation deck and the years measured in recycled air, about the choice he'd made to stay on this station, to commit his life to this work, these people, to this person. "I'll stay," he promised. Silhara kissed him, and this time the contact was deeper, more certain. Marcus responded without hesitation, let himself feel the connection forming between them, not the lattice, not the synchronization, but something entirely their own, something built one moment at a time, one choice at a time, one connection at a time. When they separated, Silhara was smiling. I think I'm beginning to understand what it means to be human. What's that? Learning to exist in the space between. Not merged, not isolated. Just together. The months that followed were difficult. The isolated lattice loop stabilized, giving the disconnected Koresh basic connectivity, but it was pale compared to what they'd lost. Marcus watched them struggle with individual consciousness, saw some adapt quickly, while others fragmented under the weight of isolation. Silhara fell somewhere in the middle. She had good days where she moved through the station with something like confidence, engaging with her work on the genetic modification protocols. And she had bad days where the silence became overwhelming, where she couldn't get out of bed, where only Marcus's presence kept her anchored. He learned to read her moods not through the lattice link, but through observation, the color of her robe, the set of her shoulders, the particular quality of quiet that surrounded her. Learned what she needed on good days versus bad days. Learned that sometimes she needed to talk through her fear, and sometimes she just needed him to sit beside her in silence. They developed routines. Breakfast together in the commissary designated for mixed species habitation. Afternoons in the genetics lab, reviewing modification protocols and integration timelines. Evenings in her quarters or his, talking about nothing important, establishing a history of small moments that gradually accumulated into something significant. The intimacy between them deepened incrementally. Silhara would reach for his hand without thinking, or lean against him while they reviewed data, or fall asleep with her head on his shoulder. Marcus found himself anticipating her presence, felt the hollow in his chest expand to accommodate something warm and alive. 6 months after the disconnection, they made love for the first time. It was hesitant and awkward, two beings from different species learning each other's bodies, figuring out what touch meant outside the shared consciousness of the lattice. But it was also profound, achingly intimate in its incompleteness. Afterward, Silhara cried against his chest, overwhelmed by the vulnerability of it. "I've never been alone with someone like that," she said. "Separate consciousnesses, separate bodies, just touch and trust." Marcus held her, feeling the dampness of her tears against his skin. How was it? Terrifying. Beautiful. Real in a way the lattice never was. She looked up at him, her eyes luminous in the dim light. Is this what love feels like for humans? This combination of fear and need and impossible hope? He thought about it. About Maya and the dissolution of what they'd had. About the years of emptiness. About this, now. Silhara in his arms, vulnerable and present and entirely herself. I think so. Yes. Her robe shifted to that pale lavender gold he'd come to associate with her specifically, the color she'd developed after disconnection. I think I love you. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, the last wall he'd built around himself, the final protection against feeling too much. I think I love you too, he said. Silhara kissed him, and they came together again, slower this time, more certain, learning each other's rhythms, the particular ways their bodies fit together, the small sounds and responses that meant pleasure or comfort or connection. Later, much later, they lay tangled together while the station hummed around them. Silhara traced patterns on Marcus's chest, her touch light and contemplative. The first generation of modified Koresh are entering the integration phase, she said. Preliminary data suggests successful adaptive capacity development. I saw the reports. We're going to survive this. Actually survive, not just exist in stasis. Yes. Because of you, because you couldn't accept that there was no solution. Marcus caught her hand, stilled its movement. Because we found a solution together. I saw the problem. You gave me a reason to solve it. Silhara was quiet for a moment. Then, I was wrong about you. When I said you were a warning, you're not empty, Marcus. You were just waiting for something to fill the space. He thought about that. About the observation deck and the recycled air and the years of measuring time. About this moment now, the weight of Silhara against him, and the future stretching ahead. Maybe, he said. Or maybe you're what filled it. 3 years after the disconnection, the first generation of modified Koresh completed their integration. Marcus stood in the genetics lab, reviewing the neural scans that showed successful adaptive architecture. They could now tolerate variability in the lattice connection, could maintain individual consciousness even when fully merged with the collective. Silhara stood beside him, her hand resting casually on his lower back, a habitual gesture of connection. Her robe was permanently lavender gold now, her personal color fully developed. "They're beautiful," she said, looking at the scans. "Like us, but different. More flexible, more resilient. Like you," Marcus corrected. "You learned adaptation before the modifications even began." She smiled. 3 years of practice had made the expression natural on her features. "We learned together." The lab door opened and Park entered, older now but still efficient. "The Council is requesting a progress report. They want projections on full species integration." Marcus pulled up the timeline displays. 2 more generations, approximately 60 years at current modification rates. After that, the Koresh can rejoin the main lattice without risk of neural collapse. "And Earth's continued participation?" "Required throughout. The genetic templates and medical expertise are integral to the process." Park nodded, making notes on her tablet. "The human government is satisfied with the arrangement. The resources and technology transfers have exceeded projections." She paused, studying Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You've changed." "Have I? You used to be absent, like you were somewhere else even when you were standing right in front of someone. Now you're here." Marcus glanced at Silhara, felt her hand press slightly harder against his back. "I learned to be present." After Park left, Silhara moved into his arms, a natural fit after 3 years of practice. "Do you ever regret it? Staying here? Giving up Earth?" "No. Never? Never." She studied his face, searching. "I think about going back sometimes, to what I was before the disconnection. Part of the collective, never alone, never afraid. Do you want that?" "No, but I remember it. The comfort of it." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "This is harder. Being individual, being responsible for my own consciousness, but it's also more real, more mine." Marcus kissed her, a gesture that had become familiar, but never lost its particular intimacy. "You're not alone in it." "I know. That's what makes it bearable." She pulled back slightly. "The modified children, they're asking questions about human relationships, about pair bonding and individual intimacy. They want to understand how it works." "What do you tell them?" "That I'm still learning, that humans have been doing this for millennia and still haven't figured it out completely." Her robe shifted, a ripple of humor. "That it's terrifying and wonderful and incomplete, and that's exactly the point." They stood like that for a long time, comfortable in the silence. Outside the lab viewport, the lattice pulsed with its usual rhythms. The corruption resolved into stable evolution. The Koresh were adapting. Humanity had found its place in the galactic community, and Marcus had found what he hadn't known he was looking for. That night, they lay together in Silhara's quarters. Their quarters, really, the space long since merged into shared habitation. Silhara's head rested on his chest, her breathing even and relaxed. "I've been thinking about the future," she said quietly. "After the full integration, when the Koresh can rejoin the main lattice." "What about it?" "I'm not sure I want to. Not completely. I've learned to value the space between merger and isolation. I don't want to lose that." Marcus ran his fingers through her hair. A gesture she'd taught him brought her comfort. "You don't have to choose all or nothing. The lattice allows variable connection density. You can maintain individual consciousness while still accessing the collective. Like you do, synced but separate." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Will you teach me how to navigate that space? How to be connected without being consumed? I'm still learning it myself. Then we'll learn together, like we always do." Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a contentment he'd never expected to experience. This was what the other side of transformation looked like. Not healing exactly, but integration. The broken pieces reassembled into something new, something that could hold both the past and the future without collapsing under the weight. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I love you too," Silhara replied. "In all my incompleteness, in all my fear and hope and impossible need. That's the only way that matters." They fell asleep like that, 2 beings learning to exist in the space between, together. 5 years after the disconnection, the council convened to review the Koresh integration project. Marcus stood at the chamber's center with Silhara, presenting the final data. 3 generations successfully modified, adaptive capacity fully developed, projected timeline for main lattice reintegration confirmed. The Centauri Elder manifested, their blue light warm with approval. The project has exceeded all expectations. The Koresh will survive. Humanity has fulfilled its commitment with integrity. The galactic community is stronger for this collaboration. Formal acknowledgements followed, species-specific gestures of gratitude and respect. Marcus accepted them mechanically, his attention focused on Silhara beside him. She stood with confidence now, her individual consciousness fully developed, her capacity for both isolation and connection balanced. After the formal proceedings concluded, they walked through the station toward the observation deck, the one Silhara had first brought him to, where she'd told him the council would follow his recommendation. The nebula beyond the viewport still swirled in layers of red and gold, timelessly beautiful. "It's finished," Silhara said quietly. "The project, your commitment to the council." "Not quite. The full integration still requires oversight. But your contracted obligation is complete. You could go home, back to Earth." Marcus looked at her, saw the fear carefully contained beneath her calm exterior. "Is that what you want?" "No, but I need to know if it's what you want." He thought about Earth, the observation deck and recycled air, and the years measured in emptiness. Thought about Maya and the shell he'd become. Thought about the man he'd been before the lattice had changed him. Then he thought about this, standing beside Silhara, watching nebula light play across her features, feeling the comfortable weight of their shared history. Thought about the routines they'd built, the intimacy they'd developed, the life they'd created in the space between merger and isolation. "I want to stay," he said. "Not because the council requires it, not because of the project, because this is home now." Relief flooded Silhara's expression, her robe brightening to luminous gold. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She moved into his arms, and Marcus held her, feeling the familiar fit of their bodies, the particular way she tucked her head against his shoulder. Beyond the viewport, the lattice pulsed with stable rhythms, evolution and preservation balanced. "I've been offered a position," Silhara said after a moment, "leading the integration research team for the 2nd-generation modifications. It would mean staying on station indefinitely. Are you going to accept?" "Only if you'll stay with me. I can navigate the silence now, but I don't want to. Not when I have the choice." Marcus tightened his arms around her. "Then I'll stay, as long as you want me. That might be a very long time. Koresh live twice as long as humans." "I know. You'll age while I remain relatively young. Eventually you'll need care. Eventually you'll die and I'll have to learn to exist without you." He pulled back enough to see her face. "Are you trying to talk yourself out of this?" "No. I'm trying to be realistic about what I'm asking you to commit to." "Silhara." He cupped her face in his hands, felt the warmth of her skin against his palms. "I spent years existing in a void of my own making. I don't want to go back to that. I want to spend however much time I have building something real with you, even if it ends, even if it hurts. That's what being alive means." Tears formed in her eyes, spilled over. "I thought humans were supposed to be logical." "We are. This is logical. Choosing connection over isolation, choosing presence over emptiness, choosing you." She kissed him, and Marcus felt the familiar rush of sensation, warmth, pressure, the particular taste and scent of her. Felt the connection between them that had nothing to do with the lattice and everything to do with deliberate choice, repeated daily, to be together. When they separated, Silhara was smiling through her tears. "I'm accepting the position, and I'm choosing you too for however long we have. That's all anyone gets. Time. The choice is what we do with it." They turned back to the viewport, standing side by side, watching the nebula swirl. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here, the first lattice dive that had broken him, the years of emptiness, the impossible choice between Koresh extinction and galactic stagnation. Thought about finding a third option, staying when he could have left, learning to exist in the space between. "Do you remember what you asked me?" Silhara said quietly. "That first night after the disconnection? When I was drowning in silence? I asked you to let me keep you anchored, to not let you become empty. You kept that promise. You held me together when I was fragmenting, taught me how to exist in individual consciousness, showed me what connection looks like outside the lattice. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing with practiced ease. But I never thanked you. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do, because you gave me more than survival. You gave me life, real life with all its terror and incompleteness and impossible hope. She looked up at him, her eyes clear. You saved me, Marcus, not just my species. Me. He felt something break open in his chest, the last remnant of the shell he'd been. You saved me too, I just didn't realize I needed saving. They stood like that while the station hummed around them, two beings learning to exist in the space between, not merged, not isolated, but together, separate but connected, individual but not alone. The lattice pulsed beyond the viewport, vast and complex and beautiful in its evolution. The Koresh would survive. Humanity had found its place, and Marcus had found what he'd been missing, not the overwhelming merger of consciousness, but the quiet intimacy of choosing someone, being chosen in return, and building a life in the space between. Come on, Silhara said, pulling him away from the viewport. We have work tomorrow, and tonight I want to teach you a Koresh meditation technique. It's designed for individual consciousness, but practiced in pairs. Together but separate? Exactly. They left the observation deck hand in hand, walking through curved corridors toward their shared quarters. Behind them, the nebula continued its eternal swirl, and the lattice pulsed with stable rhythms, and the future stretched ahead, uncertain, incomplete, and perfectly real. Marcus had learned to measure time differently now, not by the hum of recycled air or the emptiness of observation decks, but by the accumulation of small moments with Silhara, by the routines they built, the intimacy they developed, the life they created one choice at a time. He had become something he never expected, not a tool, not a specimen, not essential because of his neural architecture, just a man learning to be present, learning to connect, learning to live in the space between isolation and merger, where individual consciousness could exist alongside deep intimacy. It was terrifying, it was wonderful, it was incomplete, it was exactly the point.